You know you have been erased when your mother-in-law looks right through you, like you are a waiter holding a tray of empty champagne flutes. Elaine Hawthorne did not hate me. Hate requires acknowledgement. She simply decided I did not exist. But standing in that ballroom, clutching my wife's sweating hand, I realized this silence was not just a social slight, it was a fortress. And I was about to find the loose brick that would bring the whole thing crashing down. The invitation to the Briar Glen Civic Arts Gala was printed on cardstock so thick it felt like a weapon. It sat on our kitchen counter for 3 weeks, a heavy cream-colored square embossed with gold leaf, watching us. Every morning while waiting for the coffee to brew, I would look at it, and my stomach would tighten into a knot that did not loosen until I was safely in my car and halfway to the city. It was supposed to be a fresh start. That was the phrase Marin kept using. A fresh start. She said it with a kind of desperate optimism, the way people talk about diet resolutions or fixing a leaking roof with duct tape. We had been married for 2 years, and for 2 years, the space between me and her family had been filled with a polite, suffocating silence. But tonight was important. It was the biggest event of the season in Briar Glen, the wealthy Illinois suburb where Marin had been raised and where her mother, Elaine Hawthorne, reigned like a benevolent monarch. I adjusted the silk lapel of my tuxedo jacket in the hallway mirror. I had bought a new dress for the occasion, a deep navy column gown that Sloane, my best friend and attorney, assured me looked like armor. I needed armor. Ready, Marin asked. She stood in the doorway of our bedroom, looking devastatingly beautiful in emerald green, but there was a tremor in her hands as she clasped her clutch. She looked less like a woman going to a party and more like a soldier preparing to walk across a minefield. I am, if you are, I said. I walked over and took her hand. Her fingers were cold. We are going to have a good time. We are going to drink expensive champagne, bid on something we do not need, and be the charming couple everyone wants to talk to. Marin smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. Just stick with me. Audrey, if we stay together, Mom has to acknowledge us as a unit. She promised she would make an effort tonight. I wanted to believe her. I really did. I wanted to believe that Elaine Hawthorne, a woman who had founded 3 charities and sat on the board of the local hospital, was capable of basic human warmth toward the woman her daughter loved. The drive to the country club was short, winding through streets lined with oaks that had been standing since the Civil War. Briar Glen was beautiful in a way that felt curated, as if someone came through every morning to sweep away the dead leaves and polish the street lamps. When we pulled up to the valet, the air was already thick with the scent of lilies and old money. The ballroom was a sea of black ties and shimmering fabrics. A string quartet played something vaguely recognizable in the corner, drowned out by the hum of 200 wealthy people congratulating each other on their generosity. We had barely stepped off the red carpet when I saw her. Elaine Hawthorne was holding court near the entrance, flanked by Marin's older brother, Grant, and his wife, Paige. Elaine was in her late 60s, but looked a decade younger. Her silver hair coiffed into a severe, elegant style that did not move. She wore a champagne-colored gown that caught the light, making her the undeniable center of gravity in the room. She saw us coming. I watched her eyes flick toward us. I squeezed Marin's hand, bracing myself for the performance. "Marin, darling," Elaine exclaimed, opening her arms. She stepped forward, bypassing me entirely to embrace her daughter. "You look absolutely stunning. That color is perfect on you. It brings out your eyes. Thank you." "Mom," Marin said, pulling back slightly but staying within Elaine's orbit. Elaine turned to Grant. "Doesn't she look beautiful?" "Grant? Incredible," Grant said, raising his glass. He gave me a polite, tight nod. "Audrey." "Hello, Grant," I said. I turned my smile to Elaine, waiting for the inevitable moment when social convention would force her to greet me. "Hello, Elaine. It is good to see you." Elaine did not blink. She did not flinch. She simply looked past my left ear, her gaze fixing on a point somewhere in the middle distance, as if I were made of glass. "Oh, look," There is Councilman Miller, Elaine said brightly, her voice projecting just loud enough to carry over the ambient noise. We simply must go say hello. He has been asking about the Foundation's new initiative. Marin, come with me. He would love to hear about your promotion. She looped her arm through Marin's, physically turning her away from me. Marin hesitated. Her eyes darted to mine, wide with panic. She planted her feet. Mom, wait, Audrey is here. Elaine paused, her smile freezing in place. It was a terrifying expression, devoid of any real humor. She turned her head slowly, finally allowing her eyes to rest on me. It was not a glare. A glare would have been passionate. This was a blank, glazing look, the kind one gives to a piece of furniture that is slightly out of place. Oh, Elaine said. Her tone suggested she was surprised I had materialized out of thin air. I assumed you were checking our coats. Dear, we do not want to keep the councilman waiting. She turned back to Marin. The dismissal complete. It was a masterclass in social erasure. In under 10 seconds, she had reduced me from a family member to hired help, then to an obstacle, and finally to nothing. Marin looked at me, her face flushing pink. I could see the battle in her mind, the desire to defend me warring with 34 years of conditioning. Go, I said softly, forcing my face to remain neutral. I will grab a drink and find you there. Marin looked relieved and guilty all at once. Okay, just a minute. She let Elaine pull her away. I stood alone in the middle of the crowded entrance, feeling the heat rise up my neck. A waiter passed by with a tray of champagne. I took a glass, not because I wanted it, but because I needed something to do with my hands. The strategy was simple. Elaine did not attack. She omitted. She did not insult. She excluded. And if I reacted, if I caused a scene or raised my voice, I would become the unstable one. I would be the dramatic outsider who did not understand the Hawthorne way. I took a sip of the champagne. It was dry and tasted like crisp apples. I took a deep breath and waded into the room. For the next hour, I played a game of cat and mouse where I was the mouse and the cat was pretending to be asleep. Every time I approached the family circle, the conversation would subtly shift. If I spoke, Elaine would wait a beat too long before responding, or she would turn to someone else and answer a question that hadn't been asked. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. When the photographer from the Briar Glen Gazette arrived, the family was gathered near the silent auction tables. Elaine beckoned everyone together. Family photo, everyone. Elaine chirped, "Come on, squeeze in." Marin reached out and grabbed my hand, pulling me into the line next to her. I stood tall, putting on my best professional smile. I was a senior marketing director at a top Chicago firm. I managed million-dollar accounts. I could handle a photo. The photographer raised his camera. Perfect. Everyone smile. Wait one moment, Elaine said. She stepped out of the formation and walked over to the photographer, whispering something in his ear. She gestured vaguely toward the lighting, then toward me. The photographer lowered his camera and looked uncomfortable. He cleared his throat. I am sorry. Folks, the lighting is a bit tricky with the shadows on the end there. Could we tighten the group a bit? Maybe just the immediate Hawthorne siblings and parents for the first one? The air left my lungs. It was a public execution. Marin stiffened. Mom, no, Audrey is family. Elaine laughed, a light tinkling sound that made my skin crawl. Of course she is. Darling, but this is for the Foundation's newsletter. We need a shot of the board members and legacy heirs. We will do a fun one with everyone else in a moment. Everyone else. I felt the eyes of the other guests on me. They were pretending not to watch, sipping their drinks and adjusting their ties. But they were watching. In Briar Glen, hierarchy was a spectator sport. It is fine, I said, my voice steady. Though my heart was hammering against my ribs, I stepped out of the frame. Go ahead. Marin looked at me, her expression pained. I'm sorry, she mouthed. I nodded. Stepping back into the shadows behind the photographer, I watched as the flash went off. Elaine, Richard, Grant, Paige, and Marin, the perfect Hawthorne unit, shining, wealthy, and unbroken. I turned and walked away before they could see the tears pricking the corners of my eyes. I found refuge at the silent auction tables. The items were typical for this sort of event: a signed guitar, a basket of rare wines, a spa day for two. I walked down the line, trying to regulate my breathing. That is just Mom. If we don't react, she'll stop. Marin's words from the car ride over echoed in my head. But Marin was wrong. Elaine wouldn't stop because she wasn't doing this for attention. She was doing it for dominance. She was drawing a circle, and every time I tried to step inside, she redrew it. I stopped in front of item number 42, a weekend getaway at the Pines. My heart gave a little jump. The Pines was a beautiful, secluded cabin near Lake Geneva, but that wasn't why I recognized it. I looked at the donor card, donated by Sarah Jenkins, owner of Serenity Escapes. Sarah was a young entrepreneur I had been mentoring for the past 2 years. I had helped her build her business plan, refine her branding, and navigate the terrifying early days of startup life. She had told me she was donating a stay to a local charity to build goodwill, but she hadn't told me it was this one. I looked at the bid sheet. It was empty. The starting bid was $500. An idea formed in my mind. Marin and I needed a break. We needed to get away from Briar Glen, away from the Sunday dinners and the pressure. A weekend at Sarah's cabin would be perfect. And winning it would be a nice way to support Sarah. I picked up the pen and wrote down my bidder number, 712. I bid $600. It felt like a small act of reclamation. I was participating. I was here. Audrey? I turned to see Marin standing behind me. She looked exhausted. Hey, I said, did you get the legacy photo? Marin winced. Don't, please. She is stressed about the gala. You know how she gets. She wants everything to be perfect. And I am the imperfection? I asked. No, Marin said, stepping closer and lowering her voice. You are my wife. I love you. Please, Audrey, can we just get through the dinner? I promise. Tomorrow we can talk about it. I looked at her. I saw the fear in her eyes. The fear of rocking the boat. The fear of losing her mother's approval. It was a fear Elaine had cultivated like a rare orchid. Okay, I said, softening. I just bid on a weekend trip, for us. Marin's face brightened. Really? Where? The Pines, I said, pointing to the display. Sarah Jenkins donated it. I thought it would be nice to support her and get away for a few days. Just you and me. That sounds amazing, Marin said. She squeezed my arm. Thank you. That is exactly what we need. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The voice boomed over the speakers. The auctioneer, a man with a tan so deep it looked painted on, stood on the stage at the front of the room. Please take your seats. We are about to begin the live auction. But first, we have a few special announcements regarding our silent auction items. Marin and I moved to our table. We were seated at table 4, close enough to the front to be respectable, but far enough from table 1, where Elaine and Richard sat, to be out of earshot. I kept an eye on the silent auction tables. The volunteers were beginning to close out the sheets. I felt a little thrill of victory. No one else had bid on the cabin. It was ours. And now, the auctioneer said, we have a bit of excitement. It seems we have a last-minute flash bid on one of our silent auction items. Item 42, the weekend at the Pines. My stomach dropped. I looked at Marin. She looked confused. This item has generated some special interest. The auctioneer continued. We have received a direct bid from the Hawthorne Family Foundation for $3,000. The room gasped politely and then applauded. $3,000 was 5 times the value of the stay. I sat frozen. The Hawthorne Family Foundation. That was Elaine. And, the auctioneer went on, Mrs. Elaine Hawthorne has requested that this lovely getaway be gifted to a very special young man who has shown exemplary leadership this year. Mr. Grant Hawthorne. Grant stood up at table 1, looking pleasantly surprised. He waved to the room. Elaine sat next to him, clapping demurely, a beatific smile on her face. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. She bought it, Marin whispered, her voice trembling. She didn't buy it. I said, my voice low and dangerous. She used the foundation's money to buy it, and she gave it to Grant. She probably didn't know you bid on it. Marin said quickly, it's a coincidence. I looked at Marin. Do you really believe that? Marin looked away. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a precision strike. Sarah Jenkins was my mentee. Elaine knew that. I had mentioned Sarah at dinner 2 months ago. Elaine had listened with that polite, glazed expression she always wore when I spoke about my work. She had filed the information away, and now she had weaponized it. She had taken something connected to my professional identity, outbid me using charity funds, and handed it to the Golden Sun. It was a message. Nothing you have is yours. Not your work, not your wife, not even your charity. I need some air. I said, standing up, Audrey, wait. I walked away. I didn't run, but I walked fast. I pushed through the double doors of the ballroom and out into the cool hallway. I needed to breathe. I found a quiet alcove near the restrooms and leaned against the wall. Closing my eyes, my hands were shaking. It was so petty. That was the thing about Elaine's cruelty. It was so petty that if you tried to explain it to an outsider, you sounded insane. She bought a cabin stay? So what? It went to charity, but it was the pattern. It was the relentless, microscopic erasure. I heard footsteps clicking on the marble floor. I opened my eyes and saw 2 women standing near the entrance to the ladies' lounge. One was a woman I didn't recognize, an older woman with a severe bob. The other was Elaine. They hadn't seen me. I was tucked back in the shadows of a large potted fern. I should have cleared my throat. I should have made my presence known. I stayed silent. It is a lovely event. Elaine, the woman said, you have outdone yourself. Thank you. Cynthia, Elaine replied. Her voice was different now, sharper, less performative. We need the numbers to be high this year. The scholarship fund is draining more than I expected. Well, it is a noble cause, Cynthia said. By the way, I noticed Marin's wife is here. I didn't realize they were still together. Elaine let out a short, dismissive sigh. Oh, Audrey, yes, she is still here. Is it serious? Cynthia asked. Elaine lowered her voice. But in the echoey hallway, it carried perfectly. It is a phase. Cynthia, you know how sensitive Marin is. She needs someone to manage her emotions. Audrey is a temporary fixture. She is not aligned with the family's values. She is a bit rough around the edges, don't you think? Very ambitious. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. But Marin seems happy, Cynthia ventured. Marin does not know what she wants, Elaine said smoothly. She is easily led, but do not worry. We are handling it. Once the estate planning is finalized, things will clarify themselves. Realities have a way of setting in. Realities. They moved off toward the ballroom. I stood there for a long time, listening to the silence they left behind. Not aligned with the family's values. Temporary fixture. We are handling it. I was not a person to her. I was a problem to be solved, a stain to be bleached out. I did not go back into the ballroom. I texted Marin that I had a headache and was waiting in the car. I sat in the dark for 45 minutes, watching the valet park luxury sedans, my mind racing. When Marin finally came out, she looked exhausted. We drove home in silence. The tension in the car was thick enough to choke on. When we got into our kitchen, the dam broke. You left me there, Marin said, tossing her clutch onto the counter. She did not yell, but her voice was tight. You just disappeared. Mom was asking where you went. Oh, was she? I asked, turning on the tap to fill a glass of water. Did she ask about me before or after she told Cynthia Miller that I was a temporary phase? Marin froze. What? I heard her. Marin, I was in the hallway. She told a board member that I am not aligned with family values and that she is handling our marriage. Marin slumped against the refrigerator. She talks like that. It doesn't mean anything. She's old-fashioned. It means everything. I snapped. I set the glass down hard. She humiliated me tonight. Marin, she cut me out of the photo. She hijacked the auction item I was buying for us, and she is telling people our marriage is a sham. And you? You just stood there. I am trying to keep the peace, Marin cried. Her eyes filled with tears. You don't understand. Audrey, she's been pressuring me for months. About what? I asked. About the trust. Marin whispered. About the inheritance. She says if I don't show more stability. She is going to restructure the estate. She holds it over my head. If I blow up at her, she cuts us off. The down payment for the house? Gone. The future we planned? Gone. I looked at my wife. I saw the fear again. The deep, childlike terror of a mother who used money as love and withdrawal of money as punishment. So the price of our future is my dignity? I asked quietly. No, Marin said, reaching for me. No. Just give it time. Please, don't make me choose. I looked at her hand reaching for mine, and for the first time in 2 years, I didn't want to take it. I am going to bed. I said. I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, listening to Marin's breathing, staring at the ceiling. I was done being the victim. I was done being the emotional one. Elaine wanted to play chess? Fine. I had been playing checkers, trying to win her affection. But you don't win affection from a narcissist. You only win respect by outmaneuvering them. I got up quietly and went downstairs. I sat at the dining room table and opened my laptop. I pulled a fresh notebook from my bag. Elaine's cruelty feels organized. I wrote, "It is not random." I started a timeline. I wrote down the auction incident, the photographer, the conversation with Cynthia. Then, I reached into my purse and pulled out the gala program I had shoved in there earlier. I wanted to see how she had listed the sponsors. I flipped to the back page. The Hawthorne Family Foundation is proud to support the following initiatives: the Briar Glen Medical Center, Wing the Arts for Youth program, the Thomas J. Miller Memorial Scholarship for Underprivileged Students. I stopped. The Thomas J. Miller Scholarship. I frowned. I knew that name. My friend Sloan sat on the board of the local teachers' union. They had a scholarship with that exact name. It was funded by the union, by teachers putting in $5 from their paychecks. I opened a new tab on my laptop and typed in Thomas J. Miller Scholarship. Briar Glen. The search results came up. Established in 1998 by the Briar Glen Educators Association. I looked back at the gala program. Supported by the Hawthorne Family Foundation. Maybe they donated to it? That was possible. Foundations often contributed to existing funds. But something nagged at me. Elaine's foundation was all about ownership. She didn't like to co-sign. She liked a headline. Why would she list a small, union-run scholarship as a primary initiative in her glossy gala brochure? I looked closer at the program. The description under the scholarship read, "Fully funded and managed by the Hawthorne Family Foundation since 2010. Fully funded, managed." I pulled up the Teachers Union annual report from last year, which was available as a PDF online. I scrolled to the bottom. The Thomas J. Miller Scholarship Fund is maintained through the generous monthly contributions of our members. There was no mention of the Hawthorne Family Foundation, not in the donor list, not in the partners section. My heart started to beat a little faster. Elaine was claiming credit for a scholarship she didn't fund. It was a small thing, a lie in a brochure. But if she was lying about this, what else was she lying about? I looked at the clock. It was 3 a.m. I picked up my pen and wrote in the notebook. Discrepancy. Thomas J. Miller Scholarship, claimed by Hawthorne, funded by Union. I closed the notebook. Elaine Hawthorne thought I was invisible. She thought I was a temporary phase. She thought she could erase me. But the thing about being invisible is that it makes you very good at watching. And tonight, for the first time, I saw a crack in the fortress. I wasn't going to cry anymore. I was going to dig. 2 days after the gala, I made a decision that felt like walking voluntarily into a lion's den. I volunteered to help with the Hawthorne Family Foundation's upcoming autumn luncheon. It was a strategic surrender. Marin was still fragile from our argument, tiptoeing around the house as if the floorboards were made of eggshells. I figured if I showed up, If I rolled up my sleeves and made myself useful, I could lower the temperature. I could prove to Elaine that I was not a temporary phase, but a willing participant, and more importantly, I could get a closer look at the machinery of the foundation. I expected Elaine to refuse. Instead, she smiled that terrifying porcelain smile and said, "Oh, that would be lovely. Audrey, we always need hands for the grunt work." The grunt work turned out to be literal. While the committee members sat in the sun-drenched conference room discussing floral arrangements and menu pairings, I was relegated to a windowless storage office in the back, tasked with assembling 300 donor welcome packets. This is where I met Nadia Rios. Nadia was the foundation's operations manager, a title that seemed to encompass everything from bookkeeping to janitorial duties. She was in her late 20s, with dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide, and a nervous energy that made her jump every time a door slammed. She came into the storage room carrying a stack of glossy brochures, looking startled to find me there. "Oh," she said, clutching the papers to her chest. "I didn't know anyone was back here. Mrs. Hawthorne usually keeps this door closed." "I'm Audrey," I said, holding out a hand. "Marin's wife. Elaine put me on packet duty." Nadia hesitated, then shook my hand limp. Her palm was damp. "Oh, right, the daughter-in-law. I'm Nadia. I run the office." She began stacking the brochures on the table. Her movements were jerky, efficient but frantic. "Do you need help with those?" I asked. No, she said quickly. "I have a system. Mrs. Hawthorne likes them done a specific way. Left pocket, brochure, right pocket, donation card. If they are mixed up, she notices." I watched her work. She was terrified, not in the way an employee is afraid of a strict boss, but in the way a prey animal is afraid of a predator. "So, how long have you been with the foundation?" I asked, trying to be conversational. 3 years, she said without looking up. "It must be rewarding work," I said. "I saw the program from the gala. The scholarship fund looks impressive." Nadia's hands froze for a fraction of a second. Then she resumed stuffing envelopes. Faster this time. "Yes, it is very generous." I picked up one of the brochures. It was the same one from the gala, listing the Thomas J. Miller Memorial Scholarship as a Hawthorne initiative. "I was actually curious about this one," I said, tapping the page. "I have a friend who works with the Teachers Union. I think they started a scholarship with the same name back in the 90s. Is this a partnership?" Nadia stopped moving. She looked at the door, checking to see if it was closed. Then she looked at me, her eyes wide and pleading. "Please," she whispered, "don't ask about the history." "Why?" I asked, lowering my voice. "Just don't," she said. "Mrs. Hawthorne handles the narrative. We just execute. And if you have questions, don't put anything in writing. Never put it in an email." "Why not?" "Because she reads everything." Nadia hissed. She walked to the door, opened it a crack to peek into the hallway, and then turned back to me. "Just do the packets. Audrey, please, I need this job." She slipped out before I could ask anything else, leaving me alone with 300 glossy lies. I spent the next hour stuffing envelopes, my mind racing. Don't put anything in writing. That was not something you said in a transparent, charitable organization. That was something you said in a criminal enterprise. When I finished, I walked out to the main reception area. On the wall, proudly displayed in a brass frame, was a list of the Foundation's major achievements. Third down the list, the Thomas J. Miller Scholarship, over 200 students funded since 2010. I took a picture of it with my phone. That night, I tried to bring it up to Marin. We were eating takeout on the living room floor, a rare moment of calm. "Marin," I said, keeping my tone casual, "I was helping at the office today, and I saw something about that scholarship, the Miller one." Marin stiffened. She put down her fork. "What about it?" "I did a little digging online." I said, "It looks like that scholarship was created by the Teachers Union years ago, but the foundation materials claim your mom created it. It's a little weird, isn't it?" Marin let out a sharp sigh. "Audrey, are you really doing this?" "Doing what?" "I'm just asking a question. You are looking for problems, she said, her voice rising. You are looking for reasons to hate her. I don't hate her. Marin. But facts are facts. Why would she claim credit for something she didn't start? Because she probably took it over. Marin snapped. The union probably ran out of money, and Mom stepped in to save it. That is what she does. She fixes things. The foundation is meticulous. Audrey, they have lawyers and accountants. Do you really think she would just lie about a scholarship in print? Yes. I thought, absolutely. But looking at Marin's face, flushed, defensive, desperate to believe in the mythology of her family, I realized I couldn't push it yet. She wasn't ready to hear it. To Marin. Elaine was difficult. Yes, but she was the moral center of the universe. To suggest Elaine was a fraud was to suggest the earth was flat. Okay, I said, backing down. You're probably right. She probably saved it. Marin relaxed, shoulders slumping. She probably did. She does a lot of good. Audrey, you just don't see that side of her. I didn't argue. I just cleared the plates. But the next morning, I took a sick day from work. I didn't go to the doctor. I went to the Briar Glen Public Library. The library was a beautiful old building with a basement archive that smelled of dust and decaying paper. I felt ridiculous, like a character in a bad detective novel. But I needed to know. The internet had given me clues. But the internet was fluid. Paper was stubborn. I requested the archives for the Briar Glen Gazette from 1998 to 2005. The librarian, a young man with a nose ring, set me up at a microfilm reader. I spent 3 hours scrolling through grainy scans of old newspapers. My eyes burned, but I kept going. I found it. November 12th, 1998. A small article on page 4. Teachers Union launches Memorial Scholarship. There was a photo of a group of teachers holding a giant cardboard check. Elaine Hawthorne was nowhere in the picture. I kept scrolling. May 2002. Scholarship Fund hits milestone. Still the Union. Then, I jumped to 2010. October 2010. A front-page story. Hawthorne Foundation announces major education initiative. I read the article. It quoted Elaine extensively. We saw a need to support our local students. She said in the article, this new scholarship will be a beacon of hope. There was no mention of the union, no mention of a transfer, no mention of saving a failing fund. It was presented as a brand new creation, birthed from Elaine's benevolence. I printed the pages. As I was gathering my things, a voice came from the table behind me. You are looking at the Hawthorne files? I turned. An older man was sitting there, surrounded by a stack of books. He wore a tweed jacket that had seen better decades and had a face mapped with deep lines. I said, just doing some research. He chuckled, a dry rattling sound. Research on Elaine? Good luck. That woman doesn't have a history. She has a press release. I looked at him closer. He looked familiar. You're Calvin Meach, I said. I used to read your column in the Gazette. Used to, he said, before they pushed me out for being too loud. He nodded at the papers in my hand. What did you find? The scholarship? I hesitated. How did you know? Because it was the first thing she stole, he said. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. The Union Fund didn't run out of money. They had an endowment, but Elaine wanted the prestige. She started a fund with a nearly identical name, invited the Union Board to a partnership meeting, and 6 months later, the Union's name was off the letterhead, and hers was on it. How is that legal? I asked. He shrugged. It is legal if nobody sues. And who sues the Hawthornes in this town? The Union president got a seat on the city council the next year. Elaine endorsed him. Quid pro quo. He looked me in the eye. His gaze was sharp, intelligent. You are the new one, aren't you? The daughter's wife. Yes. I said. He leaned forward. Listen to me. That woman doesn't donate. She acquires credit. It is a currency to her. If you are digging, be careful. She buries what she can't buy. I left the library with a chill that the midday sun couldn't melt. I needed to see the office again. I needed to see if there was physical proof of what Calvin had said. I called Marin and told her I left my scarf at the foundation office when I was volunteering. It was a flimsy excuse, but it got me in the door. When I arrived, the office was quiet. Nadia was at her desk, typing furiously. She jumped when I walked in. "Just grabbing my scarf," I said, holding up a wool scarf I had brought with me in my purse, pretending to pick it up from a chair. Nadia nodded, looking relieved that I wasn't staying. I lingered. "Is Elaine in?" "She is at a board meeting," Nadia said. "She won't be back until 4. I looked toward the back office, Elaine's private sanctuary. The door was slightly ajar. Through the gap, I saw a row of filing cabinets. Most were standard beige metal, but one was different. It was a heavy mahogany veneered lateral file with a brass lock. A label on the front read, "Legacy Partnerships." Legacy Partnerships. That was the euphemism Calvin had used. The union partnership that wasn't a partnership. I took a step toward the back hallway. "Is the restroom back there?" Nadia shot out of her chair. "No!" I stopped, surprised by her intensity. "Use the one in the lobby," she said, her voice trembling. "Mrs. Van Hawthorne doesn't like anyone in the executive wing." At that moment, the front door chimed. We both froze. Elaine walked in. She was wearing a cream-colored power suit, looking immaculate and terrifying. She stopped when she saw me. "Audrey," she said. Her voice was cool, devoid of welcome. What a surprise. I held up the scarf. "Just retrieving my property. Elaine." "I left it yesterday." Elaine stared at the scarf, then at me. "How efficient of you." She walked past me, heading straight for her office. As she passed Nadia's desk, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Nadia's hand shot into her pocket. It was a reflex, fast and panicked. She was checking for something, a key. Elaine paused at her office door. She looked at the mahogany cabinet. Then she looked at Nadia. "Is everything secure?" "Nadia?" Elaine asked softly. "Yes, Mrs. Hawthorne," Nadia whispered. Elaine nodded and went into her office, shutting the door with a definitive click. I walked out to my car, my heart hammering. There was something in that cabinet, something Nadia was terrified to leave unlocked, and it was labeled with the very lie I had just uncovered. 2 weeks later, the brunch happened. It was a Sunday, the mandatory Hawthorne family gathering. We were at Elaine and Richard's house, seated around a table set with crystal and silver. The mood was deceptively light. Elaine was in high spirits. She had just secured a new grant for the hospital wing. She tapped her glass with a spoon. "I have a little surprise," she announced. "Since everyone has been working so hard this quarter, I wanted to give a little token of appreciation." She reached under the sideboard and pulled out a stack of wrapped boxes. "For Richard," she said, handing him a long, thin box. "A new putter, for Grant. A box containing a vintage watch, for Paige. Grant's wife, a diamond tennis bracelet, for Marin." Elaine handed my wife a box. Marin opened it to reveal a pair of pearl earrings. "Oh, Mom," Marin said, touching them. "They are beautiful." Elaine smiled benevolently. "Only the best for my girls." She sat down and picked up her napkin. There was a silence, a thick, heavy silence that stretched across the table. There was no box for me. I sat there, my hands in my lap, waiting. Maybe she had forgotten. Maybe it was under the table. But Elaine just buttered her roll. Grant cleared his throat. Mom? Is there one for Audrey?" Elaine looked up, her eyes widening in mock surprise. She looked at me, then at the empty space in front of me. "Oh!" She let out a short, airy laugh. "Oh, goodness. Audrey, I am so sorry. I honestly didn't realize you were doing presents." "Doing presents?" "I didn't know it was a holiday," I said, my voice steady, though I felt like I was burning alive. "Well, it isn't," Elaine said, smiling. "It is just a family tradition. I treat the family when we hit a milestone. Since you and Marin keep your finances so separate, I just assumed you wouldn't expect to be included in Hawthorne family bonuses." She looked around the table. It would be awkward, wouldn't it? Buying affection? She laughed again. It was a cue. Grant chuckled nervously. Paige looked down at her plate. Richard took a sip of wine. Maren sat frozen, the pearl earrings in her hand. She looked at her mother, then at me. "Mom, that is not fair," Maren said weakly. "Oh, don't be dramatic." "Maren," Elaine snapped, her voice turning sharp instantly. "Audrey understands. She is an independent woman. She doesn't need her mother-in-law buying her trinkets. Do you—" "Audrey?" She looked at me. It was a challenge. "Beg me," her eyes said. "Make a scene. Prove you are greedy." I picked up my wine glass. The stem felt fragile in my fingers. "You are right. Elaine," I said, "I don't need trinkets. I have everything I need." I took a sip. Elaine's smile faltered for a second, annoyed that I hadn't broken, but the damage was done. I sat there for the rest of the meal, the only person without a gift, the only person not family. It was a physical manifestation of my erasure. On the drive home, Maren tried to fix it. "I can give you the earrings," she said. "I don't even like pearls. It isn't about the earrings." "Maren!" I yelled. I hit the steering wheel. We were stopped at a red light. "It is about the fact that she treats me like a ghost. She handed out gifts to everyone at that table and laughed in my face. And you just sat there holding your pearls." "I said it wasn't fair," Maren cried. "You whispered it." I said, "You whispered it. And then you ate your salad." "Why are you so afraid of her?" Maren burst into tears. She curled into the passenger seat, looking small and broken. "Because we need the money." "Audrey," she sobbed. The silence that filled the car was sudden and absolute. "What?" I asked. "The house?" Maren wept. "The Victorian on Elm Street. The one we want. We can't afford the down payment. Not with your student loans and my salary. Mom promised." She promised she would cover the down payment as an early inheritance gift. "But only if—" "Only if what?" I asked, my voice cold. "Only if I stay in good standing," Maren whispered. "She has a file. Audrey. She tracks compliance. If I cause a scene, if I leave the family orbit, the money is gone, and she will make sure we get cut out of everything else. She controls the connections in this town. She could hurt your career. She could hurt us." I stared at the red light. It turned green. But I didn't move. "So that is it," I said. "I am being erased for a down payment. It is our future." Maren pleaded. "Just endure it for a little longer. Once we have the house, once the check clears, we can set boundaries. Please." I looked at my wife. I loved her. I truly did. But I saw then that she was not just a victim. She was an accomplice. She had been bought. The pearls, the cabin, the promise of a house. It was all a golden cage. I put the car in gear and drove. I didn't say another word to Maren that night. I couldn't. I lay in bed, staring at the shadows. Maren's breathing was heavy with exhaustion. It is not ignoring. I thought, it is social erasure. It is a tactic. Elaine was banking on me leaving. She was tightening the screws until I snapped or walked away, leaving Maren firmly back under her control. But she had made a mistake. She had assumed I was just like Maren, dependent on her approval or her money. I wasn't. I thought about the Thomas J. Miller Scholarship. I thought about the Legacy Partnerships cabinet. I thought about Nadia's trembling hands and Calvin Meach's warning. She acquires credit. If Elaine Hawthorne's power came from her reputation, from her image as the benevolent matriarch of Briar Glen, then that was her weak point. Her money was shielded, but her name was built on a foundation of lies. I wasn't going to beg for a place at her table anymore. I was going to flip the table over. I got out of bed and went to my desk. I opened my laptop and created a new encrypted folder. I named it Legacy. I needed proof. I needed the real numbers. I needed to know where the money was actually going, because if she was lying about the scholarship, she was lying about the rest. I needed to get into that cabinet. I closed my eyes and formulated a plan. I would not react. I would not cry. I would smile. I would be the dutiful, invisible daughter-in-law. I would fade into the background until I was just part of the furniture. And then, when no one was looking, I would take the keys, the coffee shop, the daily grind. was on the other side of town, far enough from the manicured radius of Briar Glen that I could breathe without worrying about running into a member of the Hawthorne inner circle. I sat in a booth at the back, nursing a black coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. Across from me sat Tessa Lang. Tessa was the director of the Briar Glen Educators Association, the nonprofit that had supposedly partnered with Elaine. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a posture that suggested she spent a lot of time carrying heavy boxes. When I had called her, identifying myself only as a concerned donor doing due diligence, she had been hesitant. When I mentioned the Thomas J. Miller Scholarship specifically, she had agreed to meet immediately. "So," Tessa said, leaning forward, her hands wrapped around a mug of herbal tea, "you want to know about the Hawthorne arrangement. I want to know who pays for it." I said, "I have seen the press releases. I have seen the Foundation's annual reports. They list the scholarship as a Hawthorne initiative, but I did some digging in the archives, and I know your union started it." Tessa let out a dry, humorless laugh. She looked out the window, checking the street, a reflex I was beginning to recognize in everyone who dealt with Elaine Hawthorne. "We started it in 1998, Tessa said. "It was named after a history teacher who died of a heart attack in his classroom. We funded it with bake sales, payroll deductions, and a small endowment from his estate. It was ours. And now?" I asked. "Now it is co-branded," she said, choosing the word carefully, as if it tasted bad. "What does that mean, exactly?" Tessa sighed. "It means that 7 years ago, the Hawthorne Family Foundation approached us. Elaine said she wanted to amplify our work. She offered to host the scholarship gala, to put it in her newsletters, to use her network to bring in big donors. We thought it was a godsend. We were struggling to keep the fund growing. We thought she was going to write a check. She didn't?" Tessa shook her head. "She wrote a check for $5,000 that first year. In exchange, she demanded that the scholarship be renamed the Hawthorne Miller Opportunity Fund in all gala materials. She demanded that the award ceremony happen at her house. She demanded that she hand out the checks to the students. And the funding?" I pressed. Tessa looked at me, her expression hardening. "The funding still comes from us. Audrey, 80% of the money given to those kids comes from the teacher's endowment and small recurring donations from retired educators. The Hawthorne Foundation covers the cost of the gala dinner, which is tax-deductible for them, and contributes a token amount to the actual scholarship, maybe 10%. My stomach turned. "So she gets 100% of the credit for 10% of the cost." Tessa nodded. "We tried to push back a few years ago. We told her we wanted to dissolve the partnership. She told us that if we did, she would publicly pull her support. She said she would tell the Gazette that she discovered financial mismanagement at our nonprofit. She threatened to destroy our reputation. We can't fight her. She is the Hawthorne Foundation. She is Briar Glen." I thanked Tessa and left the coffee shop with a buzzing in my ears that wasn't from the caffeine. It was the sound of a facade cracking. Elaine wasn't just mean. She was a parasite. She latched onto the good work of others, sucked the prestige out of it, and left the host body anemic and afraid. I needed to talk to Nadia again. I waited 2 days. I knew Marin was having lunch with her mother, which meant the coast was clear. I drove to the foundation office, parking my car around the block so it wouldn't be seen. I walked in with a confidence I didn't feel. Nadia was at her desk, buried under a mountain of invoices. She looked worse than the last time I had seen her. Her skin was sallow, and her cuticles were chewed raw. "Audrey." She breathed when she saw me. "You shouldn't be here. If she checks the security cameras." "She is at lunch with my wife," I said. "We have an hour." I walked up to her desk and placed my hands on the cool laminate surface. "Nadia." I spoke to Tessa Lang. Nadia flinched as if I had slapped her. She closed her eyes. "Oh, God." "She told me about the scholarship," I said, keeping my voice low and urgent. "She told me Elaine barely funds it. She told me it is a branding exercise." Nadia opened her eyes. They were wet. "It isn't just the scholarship." "Audrey, then what is it?" Nadia looked at the door. She stood up and walked over to the shredder. Turning it on so the mechanical whirring would create a sound barrier, she motioned for me to come closer. "It is the reporting," she whispered. "The annual reports? The glossy ones we send to the donors and the city council? They are creative." "Creative how?" "She simplifies them," Nadia said. "I prepare the real ledger. I track every penny, but before the report goes to the printer, Elaine sits down with the draft. She tells me to remove certain line items. She tells me to aggregate expenses into broad categories like program development or strategic partnerships. "That is standard for public reports, isn't it?" I asked. "You don't list every staple you buy." Nadia shook her head frantically. "No, it is not about staples. It is about the totals. The numbers in the public report don't match the internal ledger. She inflates the charitable outflows." "Inflates them?" I asked. "You mean she says she gave away more money than she actually did?" "Yes." I stared at her. "Why? Why claim you gave away money you still have?" Unless you don't have it," Nadia finished, "or unless you spent it on something else." A chill went down my spine. "Nadia," I said, "where is the real ledger?" She pointed to the back office, the mahogany cabinet, the one labeled Legacy Partnerships. "It is in there," she said. "The red book. It is a physical ledger. She doesn't trust the cloud. She writes the final adjustments by hand. She thinks it is safer. Does anyone else know?" Nadia laughed. A high, brittle sound. "Her husband knows. Richard. He signs the tax returns. He has to know, but he just signs where she points." I looked at the locked door of Elaine's office. I needed that book, but I couldn't take it. Not yet. If I took it, they would know immediately, and they would destroy me before I could decipher it. "I need you to do something for me," I said. "I can't," Nadia pleaded. "I have kids. Audrey, I can't lose this job. You won't. I promised. I just need you to keep your head down. But if you see an opportunity, if that cabinet is ever left open—" I stopped. I couldn't ask her to risk her livelihood. "Just be safe," I said. I left the office. But the seed was planted. The red book. A physical record of the truth. That night, I sat at my dining table with my laptop and a glass of wine. Marin was upstairs, asleep. She had come home from lunch with a headache, saying her mother was intense today. I opened the public tax filings for the Hawthorne Family Foundation. Nonprofits have to file a Form 990. It's public record. I started mapping the years. In 2018, the foundation claimed it distributed $400,000 in grants. That same year, Elaine was named Philanthropist of the Year by the Chamber of Commerce. In 2020, the year she received the Civic Heart Award, the reported outflows jumped to $600,000. It was a pattern. The charity spiked whenever Elaine needed a spotlight. I started cross-referencing the recipients listed in the tax forms: the Thomas J. Miller Scholarship, the Arts for Youth program, the Briar Glen Food Pantry. I called up the food pantry's annual report from 2020. They listed a donation from the Hawthorne Foundation, $5,000. I looked at the Hawthorne tax form. It listed a Community Food Security Initiative donation of $50,000. $45,000 was missing. Where did it go? I felt a surge of adrenaline. This wasn't just vanity. This was fraud. I needed to tell someone. I couldn't tell Marin. She was too fragile, too enmeshed. I called Sloan. Sloan Mercer was a shark in a silk blouse. We met at her office the next morning. I laid out my spreadsheet. I showed her the discrepancy with the food pantry. I told her about Tessa Lang. I told her about Nadia and the simplified reports. Sloan listened, her face unreadable. When I finished, she took off her glasses and rubbed her temples. "Audrey," she said, "you need to stop." "What?" I asked. Stunned. "I have proof. Look at the numbers." "You have discrepancies," Sloan corrected. "You have a mismatch between a vague tax category and a specific donor list. You have the hearsay of a disgruntled nonprofit director and a terrified employee who will deny everything if put on the stand. But it is fraud." "Sloan, maybe," she said. "Or maybe the $45,000 went to a different food security program you haven't found yet." Maybe it went to administrative costs, which are conveniently buried. Elaine Hawthorne has the best lawyers in Illinois. If you accuse her of fraud without a smoking gun, a real, undeniable document, she will sue you for defamation. She will bankrupt you, and she will destroy Marin. I slumped back in my chair. So I do nothing? Sloane leaned forward. No. You find the smoking gun. You find that ledger Nadia told you about, but until you have it in your hands, until you have a photo of the page where she cooked the books, you do not say a word, not to Marin, not to the police, and certainly not to Elaine. I drove home feeling heavy. The burden of the secret was growing. I was living in a house with a woman who thought her mother was a saint, while I was plotting to prove she was a sinner. And then, Elaine escalated the war. It was a Tuesday. I was at work, preparing for a presentation. When my phone buzzed, it was a notification from Instagram. Elaine Hawthorne tagged you in a post. I frowned. Elaine never tagged me. She barely acknowledged I had a social media presence. I opened the app. It was a photo from the lunch Marin had attended the day before. The setting was the country club terrace. The lighting was perfect. The photo showed Elaine and Marin laughing, heads thrown back, looking radiant and wealthy. The caption read, "My daughter, my legacy, my whole world. So proud of the woman she is becoming." It was a beautiful photo. Except for one thing, on the far left edge of the frame, there was a blur, a shoulder, a slice of an arm. I zoomed in. That was my shoulder. I recognized the fabric of my blazer. I hadn't been at the lunch, but I realized where the photo was actually from. It was from a family barbecue 3 months ago. I had been standing right next to Marin, my arm around her waist. Elaine had taken an old photo, cropped me out so aggressively that only a sliver of my existence remained, and posted it as if it were a current, intimate moment between just the two of them. It was a revision of history. I scrolled down to the comments. Beautiful girls. So glad to see Marin looking so happy. Family is everything. She looks so much better when she is with you. Elaine, I felt like I couldn't breathe. She looks so much better when she is with you. That comment was liked by Elaine. I called Marin. Did you see your mother's post? I asked, my voice trembling. Marin sighed. Audrey, please, I am at work. She cropped me out. Marin, she took a photo of us hugging, cut me out of it, and captioned it, "My whole world." It is literal erasure. She probably just liked the way she looked in it. Marin said, "You know how she is about angles?" And the comment she liked? The one saying you look better without me? Marin was silent. Why do you let her do this? I asked. Why doesn't it bother you? Because I am used to it, Marin snapped. And because, look, Audrey, she is helping us. Helping us how? She transferred the money for the house deposit today. Marin said softly, $50,000. It is in our account. I went cold. The price of my erasure was $50,000. She told me, Marin continued, her voice breaking, that she is happy I am prioritizing family stability. She said she hopes I continue to make smart choices. And a smart choice is pretending I don't exist? Audrey, we get the house. We get our dream house. Can't we just take the win? I hung up. I couldn't listen to it. Marin was drowning, and she thought the water was a warm bath. She had been conditioned since birth to trade her autonomy for financial security. Elaine had threatened to cut her off if she embarrassed the family. So Marin had learned to be embarrassed by herself, by her wife, by anything that threatened the Hawthorne brand. I needed air. I left work early and drove to the grocery store. I needed to do something mundane. I needed to buy milk and pretend my life wasn't a psychological horror movie. I was in the pasta aisle, staring at a box of penne, when I heard a voice. She does it to everyone. You know, I turned around. It was Paige Hawthorne, Grant's wife. Paige was a woman I had always found difficult to read. She was perfectly put together, always smiling, always agreeing with Elaine. She seemed like the perfect Stepford wife. She was standing next to her cart, holding a jar of marinara sauce. She didn't look at me. She looked at the sauce, reading the ingredients label intently. What? I asked. Paige put the jar in her cart, and finally looked at me. Her eyes were tired. There were lines around her mouth that she usually hid with foundation. "The photo," she said. "I saw it. She does it to everyone. She did it to me for the first 5 years of my marriage to Grant." "You?" I asked. "But you are the favorite. You are the perfect daughter-in-law." Paige let out a short, bitter laugh. "I am the favorite now because I submitted. I stopped having opinions. I stopped trying to have a career. I became the vessel for her grandchildren and the prop for her galas. But before that, when I was working, when I had my own name, she cropped me out of everything. She used to introduce me as Grant's friend even after we were engaged." "Why does she do it?" I asked. "Control." Paige said, "She needs to be the only sun in the sky. If you shine too bright, she blots you out, and she keeps receipts." "Audrey, what do you mean?" "I mean she has a file," Paige whispered, stepping closer, "on everyone. Me, Richard, even Marin. She hires private investigators. She digs up dirt. She found out my father had a gambling debt in the 90s and used it to make me sign a prenup that leaves me with nothing if I leave Grant." I stared at her, horrified. "She has a file on you, too." Paige said, "I heard her telling Richard." "She knows about your brother." My blood froze. My brother, Liam, had struggled with addiction years ago. He was clean now, doing well, but it was a painful chapter in our lives, a private chapter. "She knows about Liam?" I whispered. "She knows everything." Paige said, "And she will use it. If you fight her, she will leak it. She will twist it. She will make you look like a liability." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Paige looked around the aisle. "Because I saw the look on your face at the brunch. When she didn't give you a gift, I saw the fire. I lost my fire a long time ago. Audrey, but you still have yours." She reached out and touched my arm. It was a fleeting, desperate contact. "Don't let her extinguish it, but be careful. She is not just a mean mother-in-law. She is a dangerous woman." Paige turned her cart and walked away, disappearing into the dairy section. I stood there for a long time. My brother. She was going to use my brother. The anger that had been simmering in my gut boiled over. It turned into something hard and cold. This wasn't just about dignity anymore. It was about self-defense. I went home and went straight to my laptop. I wasn't going to look for emotional validation. I was going to look for the money. I pulled up the vendor list from the foundation's tax filings again. I had looked at the recipients, the charities, but I hadn't looked closely at the expenses, the consultants, the overhead. I scanned the list of service providers: legal services, Mercer Associates, standard; accounting, Davidson Group, standard; event planning, Elite Galas, standard; strategic consulting, Marble Ridge Strategies. I stopped. Marble Ridge Strategies. The payment to them was significant. $85,000 in 2020, $70,000 in 2019, $90,000 in 2018, over $250,000 in 3 years. I Googled Marble Ridge Strategies. Nothing. No website, no LinkedIn profile, no news articles. I searched the Illinois Business Registry. Marble Ridge Strategies, LLC. Registered agent. United Mail Services. Address: 4500 West Main Street, Suite 304, Oak Creek, Illinois. I looked up the address on Google Maps. It wasn't an office building. It was a strip mall. And Suite 304 wasn't a suite. It was a mailbox rental store, a shell company. Elaine was paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to a company that didn't exist, located in a mailbox in a strip mall 2 towns over. I sat back, my heart pounding against my ribs. This was it. This was the operational secret. She wasn't just hoarding credit. She was funneling money. Where was the money going? Was she keeping it? Was she paying someone off? I thought about what Paige had said. She keeps a file. She digs up dirt. Was Marble Ridge Strategies the payment vehicle for her investigators? Or was it something simpler? Was she stealing from her own foundation to fund the lifestyle that she used to impress the donors? It didn't matter why. It mattered that it was happening. I looked at the screen. I had a name. I had an address. But I didn't have the internal ledger. I didn't have the document that linked Elaine directly to the creation of the fake invoices. If I went to the police with just this, they might investigate, but Elaine would claim it was a legitimate vendor. She would produce fake reports. She would say I was a disgruntled in-law trying to smear her. She would leak the story about my brother. She would destroy Marin's life. I needed the red book. I needed the physical ledger where, according to Nadia, Elaine wrote the truth by hand. I closed my laptop. The time for observation was over. I couldn't wait for a mistake. I couldn't wait for Marin to wake up. Marin was sedated by $50,000 and a lifetime of gaslighting. I had to be the surgeon. I had to cut the tumor out, even if it meant cutting open the patient. I needed to get into the foundation office after hours. I needed to pick the lock on the mahogany cabinet. I needed to steal the book. I looked at the calendar. The Hawthorne family legacy dinner was in 2 weeks. Elaine was planning to announce Marin as her successor. She was planning to trap Marin forever in her web of lies. I had 2 weeks to burn the web down. I picked up my phone and texted Nadia. I am not asking you to do anything, but I need to know one thing. When is the cleaning crew there? A minute later, the reply came. Tuesday nights, 7 to 9. They leave the back door propped open for the trash. I deleted the text. I wasn't the victim anymore. I wasn't the outsider. I was the one who was going to bring the lights up in the theater and show everyone that the set was made of cardboard and the director was a thief. The diner was called Sal's, a grease-stained establishment in a town 20 miles west of Briar Glen. It was the kind of place where the menus were sticky and the coffee was served in mugs that had chipped rims. I sat in a booth near the emergency exit, watching the door. Nadia arrived 10 minutes late. She wore a hoodie pulled up over her hair and sunglasses, looking less like a foundation operations manager and more like a fugitive. She slid into the booth opposite me, her breathing shallow and rapid. I ordered us 2 coffees. Nadia didn't touch hers. She just wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic mug as if it were the only thing anchoring her to the earth. I am leaving. Audrey, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I put in my 2 weeks' notice yesterday. I told her my mother is sick in Arizona. Is she? I asked. Nadia shook her head. No, but I have to get out. I can't sleep. Every time the phone rings, I think it is the IRS or the state attorney general. I have kids. I can't go to jail for her. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. You won't go to jail. Nadia, you are an employee. You were following orders. Ignorance is not a defense when you are the one signing the checks, she said, pulling her hand away to wipe a tear from under her sunglasses. And she makes me sign them. She says it is good experience for me. She says she trusts me. We sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the refrigerator unit filling the space between us. Tell me about Marble Ridge Strategies, I said softly. Nadia froze. She looked around the empty diner. How do you know that name? I saw it in the tax filings. I said, $85,000 last year, $90,000 the year before. That is a lot of strategy for a foundation that runs the same 3 programs every year. Nadia let out a jagged breath. It is a ghost, Audrey. There is no strategy. There are no reports. Every quarter. Elaine hands me an invoice printed on plain Word document paper. It just says consulting services and a dollar amount. She tells me to cut the check and mail it. Mail it where? I asked. To a box in Oak Creek. Nadia said. I asked her once, just once, what they actually did for us. I asked if I should file their deliverables in the archive. What did she say? She smiled. Nadia shuddered. That cold, dead smile. She told me that Marble Ridge handles sensitive reputation management and that the board prefers not to have the details in writing to maintain deniability. She said asking questions about it was a sign of immaturity. Nadia leaned in, her eyes wide with fear. The board never asks. Audrey, they see the line item and they nod. Richard signs off on it, but the money? It disappears. And I think she uses it to pay for things she can't expense. Her personal travel, the private investigators, the hush money. Hush money? I asked. Nadia nodded. There have been others. Before you. People who started asking questions. They go away quietly. And then a few weeks later, a big check goes to Marble Ridge. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Marble Ridge wasn't just a slush fund. It was a cleanup crew. I did some checking. I said, "The address in Oak Creek is a mailbox rental." Nadia nodded miserably. "I know. I looked it up too." That was when I knew I had to leave. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. She slid it across the table. "This is the code for the alarm system at the office," she whispered, "and the spare key to the filing cabinets is in the bottom drawer of my desk, taped under the sad-looking succulent plant." "Nadia," I said, staring at the paper. "I am gone on Friday," she said. Standing up, "I am scrubbing my computer. I am taking my name off everything. If you are going to do something, Audrey, do it soon, because once she names a successor, once she locks Marin in, she will bury the records. She cleans house every 10 years. Nadia turned and walked out of the diner without looking back. I sat there for a long time, staring at the sequence of numbers written in shaky blue ink. The next day, the atmosphere shifted. I expected Elaine to be hostile. I expected the cold shoulder. Instead, I got a bouquet of white lilies delivered to my office. The card read, "Audrey, thank you for your help with the packets. We are so lucky to have your sharp eye. Let's do better at including you. Elaine." It was disorienting. When I got home that evening, Marin was beaming. Mom called. Marin said, kissing my cheek. She said she feels terrible about the gift misunderstanding at brunch. She wants to make it up to you. She raved about how professional you were at the office. I looked at Marin, seeing the desperate hope in her eyes. She wanted this so badly. She wanted her wife and her mother to coexist in a peaceful, wealthy ecosystem. She sent me flowers, I said cautiously. "See?" Marin said. "She is trying. She said she realizes she has been hard on you. She wants to start over." I didn't trust it. Elaine Hawthorne didn't apologize. She maneuvered. The maneuver became clear 2 days later. We were at a cocktail party for the Historical Society. Elaine spotted us across the room and waved. She glided over, hooking her arm through mine, a physical intimacy that felt like being embraced by a python. "Audrey," she announced, loud enough for the circle of women nearby to hear. "You simply must tell Cynthia about your marketing promotion. Marin tells me you are absolutely crushing it at work. We are so proud of your ambition." She turned to Cynthia Miller. "Audrey is the career woman of the family. So driven, always chasing the next big win." She made ambition sound like a dirty word, like greed. I smiled tight. "I enjoy my work." "Elaine, of course you do," Elaine cooed, patting my arm. "We were just saying, it is so refreshing to see someone who understands the value of acquisition. Marin is so artistic, so soft. She needs someone grounded in the financial realities. It was subtle, but it was there. She was painting a picture. Marin was the soft, vulnerable heiress. I was the sharp, hungry outsider, acquiring my way into the family. Later that night, in the privacy of our bedroom, the poison took root. Marin was taking off her jewelry. She looked at me in the mirror. "Mom said something weird today." Marin said, "Oh?" She asked if we had a joint bank account yet. She said she was worried you might feel restricted by our separate finances. She said she hopes you don't feel like you have to manage me to get access to the family resources. I stopped brushing my hair. "She is trying to get inside your head. Marin, she is trying to paint me as a gold digger." Marin turned around. "I know that, but she also said you have been asking a lot of questions about the foundation's money. She said you asked Nadia about the vendor payments." I froze. Nadia must have cracked before she left. Or Elaine had eyes everywhere. I was curious. I said, "Why?" Marin asked. Her voice wasn't angry, but it was guarded. "Why are you investigating my family?" "Audrey, Mom thinks you are looking for leverage. She thinks you want to negotiate a payout." "A payout?" I laughed. A harsh barking sound. Marin, I am looking for the truth. But why? Marin pleaded. Why can't you just let it be? Why do you have to count the pennies? It makes you look calculated? I supplied. Marin didn't answer. She just got into bed and turned off the lamp. Elaine's strategy was working. By praising my ambition publicly and whispering about my greed privately, she was inoculating Marin against anything I might find. If I came to Marin with proof of financial fraud, Elaine had already set the stage. See? She is obsessed with the money. She is trying to shake us down. I needed to move faster. On Saturday morning, I received a text from a number I didn't have saved. Richard Hawthorne. Tea time at 9 a.m. at the club. Just us. Be my guest. My stomach dropped. Richard never texted me. Richard barely spoke to me. He was a man who existed in the negative space of Elaine's personality. A quiet, scotch-drinking shadow who signed the checks and looked the other way. I showed the text to Marin. Dad wants to play golf with me? Marin looked surprised, but pleased. That is a good sign. Audrey, Dad never plays with anyone but Grant. He probably wants to bond. You should go. I went. The Briar Glen Country Club was a sprawling expanse of manicured green that smelled of fertilizer and exclusion. Richard was waiting for me at the first tee, dressed in a pastel polo that emphasized the softness of his waist. Audrey, he said, nodding. He didn't smile. Thank you for coming. Thanks for the invite. Richard, we played the first 3 holes in silence. I was a decent golfer. My father had taught me on a public course in Ohio, and I focused on my swing to keep my hands from shaking. Richard played with a mechanical, joyless efficiency. On the 4th hole, a long par 5 bordered by dense woods, he finally spoke. Elaine is worried about you, he said, lining up a shot. Is she? I asked, leaning on my club. She thinks you are unhappy, Richard said. He swung. The ball sailed down the fairway, straight and true. She thinks you feel insecure, financially insecure. I am perfectly secure. Richard, I have my own career. Richard turned to me. His eyes were watery blue, weak but devoid of warmth. They were the eyes of a man who had compromised himself so many times there was nothing left to compromise. We want to help, he said. We want to make sure everyone feels protected. He reached into his golf bag and pulled out a manila envelope. He held it out to me. What is this? I asked. Just a draft, he said. A postnuptial agreement. I stared at the envelope. You want me to sign a postnup? 2 years into the marriage? It is for clarity, Richard said, his voice flat. It outlines a generous settlement for you in the event of a divorce. $500,000. Immediate payout. No contest. I felt the blood rush to my face. You are offering me $500,000 to leave her? No, Richard said. We are offering you security so you stop looking for it elsewhere. Elaine feels that if you know you have a safety net, you might stop poking around the foundation. You might stop harassing the staff. You might settle down and just be Marin's wife. And if I don't sign? Richard looked at the trees. Then we have to assume your intentions are hostile, and we will have to protect Marin's assets more aggressively. The house down payment? That can be recalled as a loan. The estate plan? Marin can be written out entirely if she remains married to a hostile party. He looked back at me. It is a generous offer. Audrey, take the money, sign the paper, stop asking questions. Be a good wife. He walked away toward his cart. I stood on the fairway, the envelope heavy in my hand. It wasn't an offer. It was a bribe, and it was a threat. We will bankrupt you and disinherit Marin if you don't stop looking at the ledger. I shoved the envelope into my bag. I played the rest of the round with a cold fury that improved my game. I birdied the last 2 holes. When I got home, I told Marin nothing. If I told her Richard tried to buy me off, she would ask to see the paper, and if she saw the paper, she would see the generous offer and wonder why I was so offended. They are just trying to help. Audrey, it is a safety net. I was alone. 3 days later, the opportunity arrived. The foundation was hosting a Young Leaders Mixer at the office, a networking event for the children of donors. It was a chaotic evening. Caterers were running in and out. The lobby was full of people. I volunteered to help check coats. It was the perfect cover. Around 8 o'clock, a tray of wine glasses crashed in the main hallway. The sound was deafening. Red wine splattered across the beige carpet. Every head turned. Nadia's replacement, a young girl named Chloe, ran toward the mess in a panic. Elaine was in the center of the room, directing the cleanup like a general. I slipped away. I walked down the back hallway. The noise of the party faded. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I reached Nadia's desk. I felt under the succulent plant. The key was there. I grabbed it and turned to the mahogany cabinet. Legacy Partnerships. I inserted the key. It turned with a smooth, heavy click. I pulled the drawer open. It wasn't disorganized. It was meticulously ordered. Hanging files, color-coded. I flipped through them, my hands shaking. Marble Ridge Strategies, 2018. Marble Ridge Strategies, 2019. Marble Ridge Strategies, 2020. I pulled the 2020 file. Inside were the invoices Nadia had described. Plain paper, consulting services, $22,000. No letterhead, no tax ID number, and behind the invoices, a bank transfer receipt from Hawthorne Family Foundation to Marble Ridge Strategies, LLC, AXT ending in 4099. I pulled out my phone and snapped photos. Click, click, click. I kept digging. I needed more than just the shell company. I needed the intent. I found a file labeled Donor Memorandums. I opened it. These were letters of agreement between Elaine and various recipients. I found a letter to the Briar Glen Food Pantry. Subject: Donation Recognition. Terms: the Hawthorne Family Foundation agrees to donate $5,000. In exchange, the food pantry agrees to list the Hawthorne Foundation as a diamond tier sponsor, valued at $50,000 in all public materials. There it was. She was buying $50,000 of credit for 10 cents on the dollar. It was a written confession of reputation fraud. I photographed it. Then, I saw a file at the very back. It was older. The label was handwritten in faded ink. Settlement, TB, TB. I opened it. It was a legal document from 2005. Settlement Agreement and Mutual Release between the Hawthorne Family Foundation and Thomas Baines. Thomas Baines. I remembered the name. He was the foundation's treasurer before Richard took over. He had left abruptly due to health reasons. I scanned the document. It was thick with legalese, but paragraph 4 jumped out at me. Mr. Baines agrees to maintain strict confidentiality regarding the accounting practices aimed at asset reallocation and donor perception management. In exchange, the foundation agrees to a severance payment of $150,000, asset reallocation, donor perception management, and then, attached to the back of the settlement, a handwritten note from Elaine to Richard. Richard, Tom is handled. We need to be more careful with the Marble Ridge transfers moving forward. Keep them under $25,000 per transaction to avoid automatic audit triggers. I stopped breathing. This was it. This was the smoking gun. It linked Elaine to the cover-up. It linked Richard to the execution. It proved Marble Ridge was a vehicle for fraud and that they knew it was illegal. I photographed every page. My hands were shaking so bad the first image was blurry. I took it again. I heard footsteps in the hallway. I shoved the files back. I locked the drawer. I slid the key back under the plant. I turned around just as Chloe, the new girl, walked past the door carrying a roll of paper towels. She glanced in, saw me standing by the copier. "Oh, hi," she said breathlessly. "Just wine everywhere." I smiled, my face feeling like a mask of plaster. "Good luck with that." I walked out of the office. I walked out of the mixer. I walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and locked the doors. I scrolled through the photos on my phone. They were clear. They were damning. I drove home. Marin was in the living room, watching television. She looked up when I walked in. "You are back early," she said. I sat down on the coffee table in front of her. I didn't take off my coat. "Marin, turn off the TV." She frowned. "Audrey, what is wrong? You look pale." I took my phone out. I connected it to the television via AirPlay. "What are you doing?" Marin asked. "I need you to look at something." I said, "And I need you to promise me you won't speak until I'm finished." I pulled up the photo of the food pantry letter first. Elaine buys credit. Marin. She pays $5,000 and demands credit for $50,000. Marin squinted at the screen. That is just negotiation. That is how charity works. I swiped. The Marble Ridge invoices. She is funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars to a fake company in a mailbox in Oak Creek. Marin shook her head. "No, you don't understand the business side." I swiped again. The settlement with Thomas Baines. The handwritten note from Elaine. "Tom is handled. Keep them under $25,000 to avoid audit triggers." Marin went silent. She read the note. She read it again. "That is Mom's handwriting." She whispered, "Yes." I said, "Asset reallocation?" Marin asked, her voice trembling. "It means theft." Marin, "It means fraud." Marin stared at the screen. Her face lost all color. She looked like she was going to be sick. She put a hand over her mouth. "No," she moaned. "No. Dad wouldn't. Dad signs the checks. Dad knows." "Marin, the note is addressed to him." Marin stood up. She stumbled backward, away from the TV, as if the image was radioactive. "This isn't real," she said. "You fake this. You are trying to hurt us." I stood up and walked toward her. I didn't touch her. "I took these photos an hour ago, in the office. It is real. Marin, your mother isn't a philanthropist. She is a criminal, and she has been using you, and the family name, to cover it up for decades." Marin began to cry, not the soft weeping she usually did, but deep, heaving sobs that shook her whole body. She collapsed onto the sofa. "My whole life," she gasped. It's all fake?" I sat next to her and held her while she fell apart. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt sick. I had just destroyed my wife's world. But it was a necessary destruction. You have to break the bone to reset it. We sat there for an hour. Finally, Marin sat up. She wiped her face. "What do we do?" she asked. "We go to a lawyer." I said, "Not Sloan. Someone outside of Briar Glen. We get you out of the line of fire. And then we go to the authorities." Marin nodded slowly. Okay. At that moment, her phone buzzed on the cushion between us. It was an email notification. From Elaine Hawthorne. Subject, The Legacy Dinner. Marin picked up the phone with trembling fingers. She opened the email. "Dearest family, I am so thrilled to invite you all to the Hawthorne Family Legacy Dinner next Saturday. It will be a historic night. I have decided it is time to officially name the successor to the Foundation's leadership. Marin, darling, get your speech ready. It is your time to shine. We will be signing the transfer papers that evening in front of the board. Let's make this a night to remember. Love, Mom." Marin dropped the phone. "She is going to name me successor." Marin whispered, "She is going to make me sign the papers. If you sign those papers," I said, my voice hard, "you become the face of the fraud. When the audit happens, and it will happen, you will be the one holding the bag." "She is trapping me," Marin said. She realized it for the first time. It wasn't love. It was a human shield. She wants to lock in control before the rumors get too loud. I said. Marin looked at me. Her eyes were red, but the fear was gone, replaced by something else, something that looked like the fire Paige had lost. "She wants a night to remember?" Marin said softly. She picked up the phone and looked at the invitation again. "Let's give her one." I became a curator of secrets. My home office, once a place for marketing strategies and color palettes, transformed into a war room. I bought a fresh pack of manila folders and a label maker. I did not trust the cloud anymore. If Elaine had hackers or investigators, and I knew now that she did, I needed physical copies of everything. I organized the evidence not by emotion, but by statute. Folder A, the Thomas J. Miller Scholarship. In this folder, I placed the original Union Press clippings, the Hawthorne press releases claiming sole ownership, and the internal memo I had photographed in the office that explicitly discussed co-opting the narrative. Folder B, Marble Ridge Strategies. Here lay the photos of the invoices, the printout of the mailbox rental location, and the bank transfer records showing nearly $300,000 siphoned out of the foundation over 3 years. Folder C. The settlement, the most dangerous folder, the agreement with Thomas Baines, the hush money, the handwritten note from Elaine to Richard. I called Sloane Mercer. I need you to come over. I said, not as a friend, as a lawyer. Sloane arrived within the hour. She took one look at the dining room table, covered in stacks of paper, and closed the blinds. Audrey, she said, sitting down and pulling a legal pad from her bag, if we do this, we have to do it with surgical precision. You cannot walk into that dinner and scream that she is a thief. That is defamation until a court proves otherwise. Then how do I say it? I asked. We frame it as an inquiry, Sloane said, clicking her pen. We frame it as a concerned stakeholder asking for clarification on administrative discrepancies. You don't say. You stole the money, you say. Can you explain why $300,000 was paid to a vendor that does not exist? It sounds weak, I said. It is safe, Sloane corrected, and in a room full of board members and city officials, the question is often more damaging than the accusation. The accusation makes you look crazy. The question makes them look evasive. We spent 4 hours scripting the revelation. We drafted a timeline. We prepared handouts. It felt less like preparing for a family dinner and more like preparing for a trial. Midway through the afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was Paige. Can you talk? She texted. Not on the house line. I stepped out onto the back porch. The air was crisp, smelling of impending snow. Hey, I said, they are coming for you. Audrey, Paige said. Her voice was low, as if she were hiding in a closet. I was just at the club. I heard Elaine talking to the gala committee chair. What did she say? She is telling people you are having a breakdown. Paige said, she is saying that you have become obsessed with the family money because your own career is failing. She is saying you are jealous of Marin's success and that you are mentally unstable. Unstable, I repeated, the classic silencer. She used the word paranoid. Paige continued, she is planting the seed so that if you say anything at all, people will just nod and say, oh, that is just poor Audrey, off her meds. I gripped the railing of the porch. It was exactly what I had expected, yet it still stung. It was a sophisticated dismantling of my credibility. Thank you for telling me. Paige, be careful, Paige whispered. She is cornered. She knows you were in the office during the mixer. Chloe told her she saw you near the back. Elaine is terrified. Audrey, and a terrified narcissist is a dangerous thing. I went back inside. Marin was sitting on the sofa, staring at the wall. She looked like a ghost in her own house. Since I had shown her the photos 2 nights ago, she had barely eaten. She was oscillating between a furious denial and a crushing, suffocating grief. Marin, I said gently. She looked up. Her eyes were rimmed with red. Why? She asked. It was the question she had asked 100 times. We have money. Audrey, Dad made a fortune in real estate. The foundation has millions in the endowment. Why would she steal? Why would she fake it? I sat down next to her. Because money isn't the currency she cares about. Marin, then what is? Admiration. I said, she needs to be the lady of the manor. She needs the city council to bow to her. She needs the papers to print her name. But real philanthropy is expensive. Giving away actual money depletes the pile. But if she can fake the giving, if she can buy the credit for pennies on the dollar, then she gets to keep the money and the applause. Marin shook her head. It is sick. It is addiction, I said, and she has built this entire life, this entire family narrative, to feed it. And you are the final piece. Me? She wants you to take over, Marin, but not to lead, to cover. If you are the face of the foundation, you can't expose it. You become complicit by default. Marin shivered. Later that day, a courier arrived with a package for Marin. It was a thick envelope on heavy bond paper, sealed with the hawthorn wax crest, the succession papers. Marin opened them at the kitchen table. I watched her read. I saw her jaw tighten. "What does it say?" I asked. "She wants me to be the executive director," Marin said. "Starting salary of $150,000, a seat on the board. Full voting rights. That sounds standard." I said, "What is the catch?" Marin flipped to the back. "Here," she said, pointing to a clause on page 12. "Condition of appointment." I read it. The executive director agrees that all board meetings and internal strategy sessions are closed to non-board members. Spouses, partners, and extended family are explicitly barred from accessing foundation records or attending governance functions to ensure confidentiality. It was the Audrey clause. "She is banning you," Marin said. "If I take the job, I have to legally agree to lock you out. And if you don't take the job," Marin looked at the cover letter, "we need a signed commitment by the night of the legacy dinner. If you are not ready to step up, we will have to look at external candidates. Perhaps someone from Marble Ridge Strategies could step in as interim director." It was a threat. "Sign the paper. Silence your wife, or we hand the keys to the shell company and the money disappears forever." Marin pushed the papers away. "She is holding me hostage." I did not answer. I went back to my war room. I needed more ammunition. I had the how, I had the who, but I needed to understand the damage. It was easy to look at this as a victimless crime, rich people moving money around. But Tessa Lang's face in that coffee shop haunted me. I called Tessa again. "Can I come see you?" I asked. "I need to understand the impact." I met her at the Educators Association office, a cramped suite in a strip mall that smelled of toner and old carpet. Tessa looked tired. "You found something, didn't you?" she asked. "I found a lot." I said, "But I need to know something." "Tessa, when the Hawthorne Foundation partnered with you, what happened to your donors?" Tessa let out a sigh that seemed to deflate her entire body. "They left," she said. "Before the partnership, we had a list of about 50 reliable local donors, small business owners, retired teachers. They gave 500 here, 1,000 there. It kept us afloat. And after? After Elaine put her name on it?" Tessa shook her head. "The donors stopped writing checks to the Educators Association. They started writing checks to the Hawthorne Family Foundation. Why? Because Elaine told them it was more efficient," Tessa said bitterly. "She told them at the gala, 'Give to the foundation, and we will manage the distribution.' She told them their money would go further. It gave them access to her parties, her social circle. Giving to us was charity. Giving to her was status. And did the money come back to you?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "We got the scholarship money," Tessa said. 10,000 a year. But the donors? They were giving 50, 60,000 a year to her, thinking it was coming to us. She absorbed our revenue stream. Audrey. She didn't just steal the credit, she stole the future of the fund. We have been operating at a deficit for 5 years. I felt a cold rage settle in my chest. This wasn't just vanity, it was predation. Elaine was starving a teachers' union to feed her own ego. I left Tessa's office with a new clarity. This wasn't a family squabble. This was justice. But there was one loose end. Richard. I needed to know how deep he was. Was he just a signatory? Or was he an architect? I went back to the photos I had taken of the documents. I zoomed in on the email chain attached to the Thomas Baines settlement. There was a response from Richard that I hadn't read closely before. "Elaine," the email read, "I am uncomfortable with the Baines payout. It strains the operating account. However, I understand the necessity. If the reporting corrections became public, the family name would be irreparably damaged. I will authorize the transfer, but we must be more discreet. Grant and Marin can never know the extent of the creative reporting. We do this to protect them." I sat back. We do this to protect them. It was the ultimate lie of the enabler. Richard wasn't protecting Marin. He was protecting the delusion. He knew everything. He knew about the theft, the fraud, the payoffs, and he had rationalized it as a noble sacrifice to shield his children from the truth that their mother was a fraud. I showed the email to Marin that night. She read it in silence. He knew. She whispered, My dad knew. He authorized it. I said, Maren closed her eyes. I always thought he was the good one. I thought he was just weak. But he is. He is one of them. He chose his wife over the truth. I said, and now they want you to do the same. The next day was Friday, the day before the dinner. I was leaving my office building at 6 o'clock. The parking garage was dark, the concrete echoing with the sound of my heels. I unlocked my car. Before I could get in, a black sedan pulled up directly behind me, blocking me in. My heart hammered. I reached for my phone. The window of the sedan rolled down. Elaine sat in the back seat. She looked immaculate, framed by the soft leather interior. Get in. Audrey, she said, I am not getting in the car with you. Elaine, she smiled. A thin, razor-wire smile. We can talk here. Then, but the acoustics are terrible. She opened the door and stepped out. She was wearing a cashmere coat that probably cost more than my first car. She walked over to me, invading my personal space, smelling of Chanel No. 5 and cold air. You have been busy, she said. I don't know what you mean. Don't insult my intelligence, she snapped. I know you were in the office. I know you met with Tessa Lang. I know you have been whispering to Sloane Mercer. She stepped closer. Her eyes were hard, devoid of the social sparkle she wore in public. You are going to ruin Maren's life, she said. Do you realize that? If you expose the foundation, you expose the family, Maren will be dragged through the mud. Her name will be toxic in this town. Is that how you love her? By destroying her legacy? You destroyed her legacy. Elaine, I said, my voice shaking slightly but holding firm. You destroyed it when you decided to use a shell company to launder money. Elaine laughed. It was a genuine laugh, filled with disbelief. Launder? Oh, you are dramatic. It is asset management. My dear, everyone does it. That is how wealth is preserved. You wouldn't understand. You come from nothing. I may come from nothing, I said, but I didn't build my life on lies. Elaine's face hardened. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a hiss. Listen to me, you little upstart. You are going to sign the postnup. Maren is going to sign the succession papers, and you are going to smile at the dinner tomorrow night. Because if I don't, then I release the file on your brother, she said. Liam, isn't it? The heroin addict? I have police reports. Audrey, I have photos of him buying from a dealer in Columbus. I will send them to your employer. I will send them to every client you have. I will paint you as a desperate woman from a criminal family trying to extort the Hawthorns. I stared at her. She was a monster, a perfectly coiffed, terrifying monster. You would destroy my brother to save yourself? I would burn this whole city to the ground to save my family, she said. People like you don't win against people like me. Audrey, we have the endurance. We have the resources. You have nothing but self-righteousness. She turned and opened the car door. See you at dinner, she said. She got in. The car backed up and drove away, leaving me standing in the exhaust fumes. I didn't tremble this time. I felt a strange calm settle over me. People like you don't win against people like me. She was wrong. People like her built their castles on sand. They relied on fear. They relied on silence. I got in my car and drove home. When I walked in, Maren was pacing the living room. She looked frantic. Audrey, thank God. We have to stop this. What? I asked. I talked to Mom. Maren said, she called me. She was crying. She said she knows she made mistakes. She said she just wanted to secure our future. She wants to meet, just the three of us, tomorrow morning, before the dinner. You believe her? I asked. She sounded scared. Audrey, she said if we can just talk, privately, we can work something out. She said she would amend the succession papers. She said she would let you on the board. I looked at my wife. She was so desperate for a mother who loved her. She was bargaining with the tiger, hoping it wouldn't eat her if she just fed it enough steak. Maren, I said, she just threatened to ruin my brother's life in a parking garage 10 minutes ago. Maren stopped pacing. What? She cornered me. She told me she has photos of Liam. She told me she would send them to my boss if I didn't shut up. Marin stared at me. No, she wouldn't. She did. Marin, she is not crying because she is sorry. She is crying because she is losing control. Marin sank onto the sofa. She put her head in her hands. But can't we just meet her? Marin asked, her voice small. Can't we just try to settle this quietly? If we go public, Audrey, the scandal, it will never go away. I can't live in this town if everyone knows. I sat down next to her. If we meet her privately, Marin, do you know what will happen? Marin shook her head. She will have a lawyer there. She will have a non-disclosure agreement ready. She will offer us money, maybe a seat on the board, but only if we sign a document that says we can never speak about the past. Marin looked at me. So? Isn't that better than war? No, I said, because the fraud continues. Tessa Lang continues to lose donors. The money keeps flowing to Marble Ridge, and we become part of it. If we sign that NDA, we aren't just silent. We are accomplices. Marin began to cry again. I don't want to be an accomplice, but I don't want to destroy my family. Your family is already destroyed, I said softly. It was destroyed the moment your mother decided she mattered more than the truth. I took Marin's hands. We have a choice. We can live in a beautiful house paid for by stolen money, with a mother who holds a gun to our heads, or we can burn the house down and build a real one. Marin looked at our joined hands. She twisted her wedding ring. If we do this, she said, her voice shaking, she will hate me forever. She doesn't know how to love you. Marin, she only knows how to own you. Marin took a deep, shuddering breath. She wiped her face. She looked at the invitation on the coffee table. The Hawthorne family legacy dinner. Okay, she whispered. Okay? Okay, Marin said, her voice gaining a fraction of strength. We don't sign the NDA. We don't meet privately. So we go to the dinner? I asked. Marin nodded. We go to the dinner, and we tell the truth. I squeezed her hands. But, Marin said, looking up at me with a flash of steel in her eyes that I had never seen before, we do it my way. What is your way? We don't just ask questions, Marin said. We bring the receipts, all of them, and we don't let her interrupt. I smiled. It was a grim, determined smile. I spent the rest of the night finalizing the dossier. I made copies for the keyboard members. I made a copy for the city official who would be in attendance. I texted Sloan. It is a go. We are doing it at the dinner. Sloan replied, I will be there. I'm bringing a notary. I lay in bed that night, listening to the wind howl outside. I thought about Elaine's words. You shouldn't have built your life on paper. She had meant it as an insult to me, implying my status was flimsy, but she had projected her own weakness. Tomorrow night, I was going to light a match, and we would see whose house was made of stone and whose was made of paper. The driveway of the Hawthorne estate was lined with cars that cost more than my parents' house. Bentleys, Mercedes, a vintage Rolls-Royce that belonged to the mayor. The house itself was lit up like a cathedral, every window glowing with a warm, golden light that promised comfort and exclusion. I checked my reflection in the visor mirror. My lipstick was a shade of red called Power. My hands were steady. Beside me, Marin was staring out the window, her face pale. She looked like someone being driven to the gallows, not a dinner party. We can still turn around, she whispered. We can just leave, go to a hotel. And then what? I asked. She releases the photos of Liam? She cuts you off? She wins. Marin, if we leave now, we are fugitives. If we go in there, we are soldiers. Marin took a deep breath. She looked down at her lap, where her hands were twisting the fabric of her silk dress. I don't know if I can do it, she said. You don't have to do the heavy lifting. I said, you just have to stand. When the moment comes, just stand. I reached into the back seat and grabbed my leather portfolio. It contained 3 folders. Folder A, Folder B, Folder C. It felt heavy, not with paper, but with consequence. Let's go, I said. We walked up the stone steps. The heavy oak door swung open before we even knocked. A caterer in a white tuxedo jacket nodded to us. "Good evening, ladies. Coats?" I handed him my trench coat. I held onto the portfolio. The living room was transformed. The furniture had been pushed back to accommodate 5 round tables, draped in heavy white linen and set with the Hawthorne family silver. There were about 40 people in the room. I recognized Councilman Miller, sipping scotch by the fireplace. I saw the entire board of directors for the foundation. I saw wealthy donors, local business tycoons, and the inner circle of Briar Glen society. And there, in the center of it all, was Elaine. She wore a gown of midnight blue velvet. She looked regal, commanding, and terrifyingly composed. She was holding court with the chairman of the hospital board, laughing at something he had just said. She saw us enter. Her eyes flicked over Marin, softening with a possessive pride, and then slid to me. The warmth evaporated instantly, replaced by a flat, warning stare. "Remember the parking garage?" Her eyes said. "Remember what I have on you." I smiled at her. It was the first honest smile I had given her in 2 years, because for the first time, I wasn't trying to please her. "Everyone, take your seats," Elaine announced, clapping her hands. "The dinner is served." We were seated at the head table. Of course, Elaine sat in the center. Richard was on her right. Marin was on her left. I was seated next to Marin, on the far end, separated from the power center by the bulk of Grant and his wife, Paige. Paige caught my eye as she sat down. She looked at the portfolio on my lap. She gave a microscopic nod. She knew. The dinner was a blur of courses: lobster bisque, filet mignon, expensive wines poured by invisible hands. The conversation was the usual Briar Glen patter: golf handicaps, property values, and the upcoming election. I ate nothing. I drank water. When the dessert plates were cleared, Richard stood up and tapped his spoon against his wine glass. The room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming," Richard said. His voice was steady, but I noticed he was gripping the tablecloth with his free hand. "Tonight is a special night for the Hawthorne family. We are celebrating 30 years of the foundation, 30 years of giving back to the community we love." There was polite applause, but Richard continued, "Every legacy needs a future. And tonight, Elaine has a special announcement regarding the leadership of that future." He sat down. Elaine stood up. She waited for the room to focus entirely on her. She soaked up the attention like photosynthesis. "My friends," she began, her voice rich with emotion. "When I started this foundation, I had a vision. I wanted to build a pillar of support for Briar Glen. I wanted to ensure that our schools, our hospitals, and our artists had a champion." Here," Councilman Miller shouted from the back. Elaine smiled benevolently. "It has been my life's work, but a mother's greatest work is her family. I look around this table and I am so blessed." She turned to Grant. "My son, Grant, you have built a business empire of your own, and yet you always find time for the board. I am so proud of you." She turned to Paige. "And Paige, who raises my beautiful grandchildren with such grace, you are the heart of this family." She turned to Richard. "And my husband, who has been my rock, my advisor, and my partner in every sense." Then, she turned to Marin. "And my daughter, Marin." She paused for dramatic effect. She did not look at me. She did not say my name. I was sitting 6 inches from Marin, and to Elaine, I was empty space. I was a ghost. This was the test. She was daring me to react. She was showing the room that I was irrelevant, a non-entity, a temporary appendage that didn't warrant a syllable of acknowledgement. "Marin," Elaine said, her voice trembling with theatrical tears, "you have grown into a woman of such compassion, such integrity. You are the perfect embodiment of the Hawthorne values, and that is why, tonight, I am stepping down as executive director of the Hawthorne Family Foundation." The room gasped. This was news. "And," Elaine continued, raising her glass, "I am thrilled to announce that the board has unanimously approved Marin Hawthorne as my successor, effective immediately." The room erupted in applause. People stood up. Flashbulbs from the hired photographer popped. Elaine reached under the table and pulled out a leather binder. She placed it in front of Marin. A gold pen sat on top of it. "Sign it." "Darling," Elaine whispered, loud enough for the table to hear. "Sign it and take your place." Marin stared at the document. Her hands were shaking so badly that the water in her glass rippled. She looked at the paper. Then she looked at her mother. Elaine was beaming, her eyes hard and expectant. "Sign it, or I destroy your wife." Marin looked at me. I put my hand on her knee under the table. It was time. I stood up. I didn't tap my glass. I didn't shout. I just stood up, clutching my portfolio, and waited. The applause died down slowly. People noticed me standing. Confusion rippled through the room. Was I making a toast? Was I interrupting? Elaine's smile froze. She turned to me, her eyes narrowing into slits. "Audrey," she said, her voice tight. "We are in the middle of a moment. Please sit down." I stayed standing. I looked at the councilman. I looked at the board members. "I am sorry to interrupt, Elaine," I said. My voice was calm, projecting clearly to the back of the room. "But before Marin signs anything, there is a question that needs to be answered." Elaine laughed. It was a brittle, dangerous sound. "A question? Really, dear? We can do Q&A later. This is a celebration." "It is a simple question," I said. I opened my portfolio. I took out folder A. "Can the foundation confirm tonight exactly how much financial capital it contributed to the Thomas J. Miller Scholarship in the last fiscal year?" The room went dead silent. It was an odd, specific, bureaucratic question. It wasn't what anyone expected. Elaine rolled her eyes. She looked at the guests with a conspiratorial shrug. "You see? She is obsessed with the numbers. Audrey, this is hardly the place to discuss line items. We contributed the full amount, as always. Now sit down." I pulled out a document from the folder. "That is interesting," I said, "because I have here the financial records from the Briar Glen Educators Association." I held up the paper. According to their filings, the scholarship fund distributed $20,000 to students last year. $18,000 of that came from the Teachers Union Endowment. $2,000 came from the Hawthorne Foundation. I looked at the board members, and yet, I said, picking up the glossy gala brochure from the center of the table. "In this brochure, the Hawthorne Foundation claims full credit for funding the initiative. You accepted a platinum sponsorship from the city worth $50,000 based on this claim." Elaine's face turned a mottled red. She stood up. "This is outrageous," she snapped. "You are misinterpreting data you don't understand. The partnership involves administrative support and intangible assets." "Intangible assets," I repeated. "I suppose that is one way to describe it." I dropped folder A on the table. It made a heavy, flat sound. I opened folder B. "But if we are talking about intangibles," I said, "let's talk about Marble Ridge Strategies." Richard stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Audrey, that is enough," he barked. "You are drunk. You are embarrassing yourself and your wife. Leave this house immediately." I ignored him. I looked directly at the councilman. "Councilman, are you familiar with Marble Ridge Strategies?" I asked. The councilman looked uncomfortable. He cleared his throat. I believe they are a consulting firm the foundation uses." I held up the photo of the strip mall. "This is their headquarters." I said, "It is a mailbox rental in Oak Creek. Suite 304. I held up the bank transfer records. "And this," I said, my voice rising just enough to cut through the tension, "is a record of $300,000 transferred from the foundation to this mailbox over the last 3 years. The silence in the room was no longer awkward. It was horrified. "There are no invoices." I continued. "There are no deliverables. There is no website. There is just $300,000 of donor money, your money, vanishing into a shell company controlled by Elaine Hawthorne." "Lies!" Elaine screamed. She slammed her hand on the table. "This is a setup. She is doing this because I cut her out of the will. She is a gold digger." Richard moved toward me. He looked ready to physically grab me. I pulled out folder C. I stepped back, putting the table between me and Richard. "I am not doing this for money." Richard. I said, and neither are you. You are doing it to protect the name. I pulled out the email. This is an email from Richard to Elaine, dated October 15th, 2005. I said, I read it aloud. I am uncomfortable with the payout. However, if the reporting corrections became public, the family name would be irreparably damaged. I will authorize the transfer, but we must be more discreet. I looked at Richard. He froze. His face went gray. Discreet. I repeated. I looked at the room. The Hawthorne Family Foundation is not a charity. It is a reputation management firm. They steal credit from small nonprofits to build their image. They use donor money to pay for personal investigations and hush money, funneling it through a fake company called Marble Ridge. And they use you, the board, the city, the donors, to validate the lie. Elaine was shaking. She looked like a statue that was cracking from the inside out. She turned to Marin. Marin, stop her! Elaine screeched. She is lying. She is jealous of you. She wants to ruin your moment. Tell them. Tell them she is crazy. All eyes turned to Marin. Marin sat there, the gold pen still resting on the leather binder. She looked at the papers I had spread across the table. She looked at her father, who was staring at the floor. She looked at her mother, whose face was twisted into a mask of pure, desperate malice. And then she looked at me. Marin stood up. She didn't look at Elaine. She looked at the councilman. I will not be signing these papers tonight, Marin said. Her voice was quiet, but in the silence, it sounded like a gavel. Marin! Elaine gasped. What are you doing? I am asking the board to suspend all operations immediately, Marin said, her voice gaining strength. I am asking for an independent forensic audit of the foundation's finances, dating back to 1998. Elaine grabbed Marin's arm. Her nails dug into the silk. You ungrateful little brat, Elaine hissed. After everything I did for you? I bought you everything. I made you who you are. Marin pulled her arm away. You didn't make me. Mom, you curated me, and I am done being a prop. Elaine stumbled back. She looked around the room. She saw the faces of her friends, her peers. They weren't looking at her with admiration anymore. They were looking at her with calculation. They were distancing themselves. They were already wondering how to spin this, how to untangle their names from hers. Elaine turned on me. Her eyes were wild. You, she spat. You did this. You poisoned her. I didn't poison her. Elaine, I said, I just showed her the antidote. You are a nobody, Elaine screamed. You are a waitress's daughter from Ohio. You have no standing here. You ignored me, I said quietly. I stepped closer to her. You ignored me at the gala. You ignored me in the photos. You ignored me at brunch. You ignored me because you needed everyone to think I had no standing. You needed everyone to think I was weak, temporary, invisible. Because if I was invisible, no one would listen when I pointed out that the emperor had no clothes. I gestured to the papers on the table. Well, I am not invisible anymore, and neither is your ledger. Elaine looked at the papers. Then she looked at Richard. Richard had sat down and put his head in his hands. He was done. Elaine realized she was alone, but Elaine Hawthorne did not surrender. She did not cry. She did not apologize. She straightened her spine. She smoothed the velvet of her dress. A cold, terrifying calm settled over her features. You think you have won? She asked softly. You think this bookkeeping error is what matters? She looked at Marin. You want an audit? She asked. You want to dig up the past? Yes, Marin said. We want the truth. Elaine laughed. It was a low, dark sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. You don't want the truth, she said. You think the scholarship is the secret? You think Marble Ridge is the secret? She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried to the corners of the room. Those are just the operational costs. Marin, the real secret, the reason the audit can never happen, is buried a lot deeper than 2005. She looked at the councilman, then at the older board members. If you open those books, she said, her voice laced with venom, You don't just take me down. You take down the hospital. You take down the city council. You take down half the people in this room. Because the Hawthorne Foundation didn't just launder money for me, it laundered it for all of you. The room erupted in chaos. People started shouting. The councilman looked pale. Elaine turned back to me. Her eyes were black holes. You struck a match. Little girl, she whispered, but you are standing in a room full of gasoline. She turned and walked out. She didn't run. She walked with her head high, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor, leaving a room full of fractured alliances and terrified millionaires behind her. The dinner ended not with a toast, but with a scramble for the exits. 2 hours later, Marin and I were sitting in our car in the driveway. The house was dark. The guests were gone. Richard had locked himself in the library. Marin was staring at the dashboard. She said she laundered it for everyone. Marin whispered, "Do you think that is true?" "I don't know," I said, "but we are going to find out." My phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. It was a text from an unknown number. I opened it. "It's Nadia. I heard what happened. You need to know one more thing. The file labeled Title B isn't just about money. Thomas Baines didn't leave for health reasons. He died in a car accident the week after he signed that settlement. And the car, it was leased by Marble Ridge Strategies." I stared at the screen. The cold air of the car felt suddenly freezing. This wasn't just fraud. This wasn't just theft. I looked at Marin. I looked at the dark silhouette of the Hawthorne estate. Elaine was right. I had struck a match, but I had no idea how big the explosion was going to be. The truth was out, but the war had just begun. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed this journey into the dark heart of the Hawthorne family. It is a story about the power of observation, the danger of silence, and the resilience of truth. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from. I am always amazed to see how far these stories travel. Are you in New York, London, Sydney, or maybe a small town just like Briar Glen? And if you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories. We have many more tales of justice, betrayal, and redemption coming your way. What did you think of Audrey's decision to go public? Do you think she did the right thing? Or should she have taken the deal? Share your thoughts in the comments in English. I read every single one. Until next time, keep watching, and never let anyone erase you.